All right, guys, so I got a 2001 Chevy 3500, the Duramax and ZF6. I'm usually happy with the stock shifters in these trucks, but this one's got some piece of crap rigged up by the previous owner. It's extended and it has this stupid Pep Boys knob on it. So anyway, it's got a whole bunch of slop in it. Now this truck's got 260,000 miles on it, so I expect some, but this is just a bit more than I'd like. I have a half-ton Chevy that's also stick, and it's got about the same miles and doesn't have any of this. So I wanted to buy a new handle from GM, but it's actually discontinued and I wasn't able to find a good used one. So I decided to buy the CORE shifter, and we'll see how that goes. Another reason I don't like this setup is it almost touches the steering wheel, putting it in reverse and low. We'll see if we can do better on that. So inside the box, you'll find the instructions. The handle, which is not a real Hurst handle, but they do tell you that online. With the GM ZF6 kit, you don't get a real Hurst one. The shift tower looks very, very good quality. It's even got its own boot in it to seal up the shaft. Everything moves really smoothly. Should feel pretty good. Then boot to seal that up. It's got the properly engraved shift knob, which is hard to find for these trans. Some hardware, and then a grommet to adapt to the factory shift boot. Okay, so to remove the factory shifter, my truck has been screwed with before, so it might be a little different, but this thing's so loose I can just unscrew it off the top of the trans. Okay, with that out of the way, you can look in the end of the factory shifter here. You'll see this is on a rubber bushing. Mine has a lot of play in it. That gave it a kind of rubbery feel when it snaps into each gear that I really didn't like. So now we got to take the boot off. If you pry up the edges here, you will see there's a Phillips head screw in all four corners. Remove those. A little trick is use a ratchet with a Phillips on it to get these back ones here, because a full-size screwdriver hits the dash. It's kind of annoying. Now, like I said, my truck's already been apart, so this thing's all torn up already. But you'd have to cut it anyway to do this job. Basically, you want to peel this back. You want to clean all this dirt out of here, because when we have the shift tower out, you don't want all this crap falling into the transmission. So just give that a decent clean with a towel, a little brake clean, whatever, and then we'll get to taking the shift tower out. Another thing to notice is when we have this thing coming apart, see this up and down play in the ball here? This doesn't look like a lot of slop, but when you put a 2-foot shifter on it, it turns into kind of a big deal. Once you get all your bolts out, you can try to remove this. It's usually glued in with silicone, so you can get right under this lip right here with a pry bar. Pry that way. Just be careful, the tunnel of the truck's really soft here and bends easily. If not, you'll have to get a screwdriver under the corner and work it up. Here's the factory shift tower and the CORE shift tower. You can see the CORE shift tower has a very thin flange. Make sure you use the bolts provided from them. The factory ones will be way too long. The CORE shifter's got a replaceable ball cup here, where the factory one is metal on metal right to the rail. In theory, this should work well and is easier to swap out if it does get sloppy. The rest of it, you can see that this thing's taller. They've moved the pivot point up, and that's where the actual short throw mechanism comes from there. Clean up the top of the trans, put a little RTV on it, run the new bolts in. You're done with the tower install. You can tuck your foam back in, even caulk it together, whatever you want to do. I'm not worried about it. Make sure you orient it with the serrations headed towards the passenger side of the truck. That way the shifter leans towards the driver. You can install the shifter. It's 2 9/16 bolts. The serrations line up between the shifter and the stem there. Then you want to slide the provided boot on. It only goes over the first lip on the shift tower, and then you wrap that zip tie around there. She's good to go. Final step, thread on your lock nut and your shift knob. It's a 9/16 wrench. Set the knob where you want it, and then tighten up the lock nut, and you're in there. Throw is considerably reduced. What I like about it is the lack of slop. That's in neutral. We got just a tiny bit. In gear, very minimal slop compared to what it was. Feels good for a 250,000-mile transmission. So I've had this shifter installed for about 3 weeks now. I would say I'm pretty happy with it. I do have 2 complaints that I'll get into later. But anyway, I haven't done anything to it. In the last video I filmed, I said I couldn't get it in reverse. That's actually false. You just have to really slam this thing over to get into reverse and low. That's one of the things that I'm not so happy about with this shifter, is the amount of force it requires to get through the gate. But I do feel that it's loosening up a little bit. When I'm driving the truck, it's fine, but when I let someone else drive it, you know, I have to warn them of it. Otherwise, the shifter is still very tight. It's a pleasure to drive daily. Another problem I have with it is it does transmit more noise into the cab than the factory shifter does. It doesn't have any rubber between the shifter and the transmission. So when you really lug the motor down and you hear the vibrations, they kind of come through this like a stethoscope into the cab and make a little noise. But it's a diesel anyway, so there's plenty of other noises going on, and you can turn the radio up. I guess the last thing, a little nitpicky, is that this grommet down here kind of keeps popping out of the boot. Probably a little black silicone. You could glue this in, have a nice factory look, but I'm not that fancy. Overall, the shifter is a pleasure to drive daily. Overall, I'd say it's a very nice piece. Feels great, works great.